I'm a massive fan of experimenting when mixing, when producing, when making music in general, but there is a time and a place for fundamentals, for basics, and I'd like to tell you my thoughts on the basics, the fundamentals of mixing. My name is Nick Rollo. I'm a producer and mixing engineer from lovely Australia. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the Producer Place. This will be a bit of a rant, no doubt. I do have a plan loosely, but I'm just going to kind of talk about the things that I want to talk about. So sit down, grab a coffee, enjoy the ride. Shouldn't be too long. And let's get into it. Oh wait, there's some Freebies linked below. Check them out. Studio One stuff, vocal mixing cheat sheet, blah, 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 blah. Have fun. So first off, what is mixing? Probably a good question to ask. In my opinion, mixing is the act of balancing. Production is where you make the song, and then mixing is where you make the song sound the way that you want to sound, in the sense of, I want to hear the bass, or I want to hear the vocals, or I want the vocals to be on the left side. You get what I mean? Production is where you make it, mixing is where you balance it. And real quick, why am I making this video? I feel like everyone talks about tips and tricks. Everyone's like, use this plugin to sound amazing instantly. And there is a time and a place for that, as I said. You can do just so much with the basics, with the very, very basics. The most core stuff, don't even get complicated. There's so much you can do with it. And that's why I'm making this video, especially if you're a beginner and a producer and you're kind of looking at how do I mix music. Hopefully this will kind of point you in the right direction. So there's 5 parts to this video. The first is volume. And before you cut off, just listen. Volume is the most important part of mixing, without a doubt. There's no question about it. Volume is the single most important aspect of mixing. It is the core of the balance. You can do so much without touching another part of this whole video, of any part of mixing. Volume is the core. If you want the vocal to be louder, turn it up or turn something else down. If you want the kick to be a little bit less in your face, pull it back. That 2D plane of volume is the single most important thing and the single most useful tool you have. Nothing else really matters to some extent because you can do so much with volume. Like masking and things like that, you have to make decisions when you're mixing. You have to make decisions of, do you want the bass or the kick, which both occupy similar spaces? Which one do you want to be louder? Which one do you want to focus on? Because you can't always have them both in your face. That's the decision that you have to make. Which one? And volume is the way that you do that. Push the kick up, pull the bass down, or push the bass up. Whichever one you choose, you have to make the decision. And of course, you can get a bit of both sometimes, but there are usually trade-offs involved. Do you want the vocal in your face or the guitar that is occupying that kind of sibilant range? Because if you have them both really loud, they're just going to clash. So at kind of some fundamental level, in my opinion, volume is the core component. Now you can use EQ to sort of carve space for things to sit together, but kind of keep in mind that EQ is just kind of volume in a way. It's just pulling frequencies out of the way so that they can sort of sit together. But at the end of the day, where you place them with volume is really a massive component of mixing. So this is I've done this in a sort of a step sequence. So if you're beginning to mix, or even if you've mixed for a while and you kind of want to get better, follow this process, because I think it really is quite an effective way to mix. First phase is volume. Try to get the mix sounding good with just touching faders, just pulling things up and down. You don't necessarily need to automate yet. Automation is where you ride the volume throughout the song. It goes higher in the chorus or whatever. Just try changing the volume and see how that feels. Can you get the mix feeling good without touching anything else? I think you'll be able to get it sounding pretty good. Now the next step is panning. Panning is just where you put stuff in the spatial spectrum, I guess. Left, center, right. I watched a video ages ago. I can't remember the name of the channel. They also make gear and plugins. If it comes back to me, I will say. But basically they made a video about LCR, left, center, right. And it really kind of spoke to me. Panning, you've got a lot of options, right? You can go left 98 or left 47, vice versa on the other side. That can get kind of confusing sometimes because you've got a billion options. Doing LCR, I think, is quite an effective way, especially when you're starting out, because you have to make a decision. Is the instrument going to be here, or is it going to be here or here? Those are your decisions. Do you want to put the guitar in the center with the vocal, or do you want to put it to the left or the right? Now you can obviously advance from that and, left 25 or whatever, but keeping the decision simple is, I think, really effective. Panning, it's kind of similar to volume. You have to make decisions. In my opinion, the things that should be in the center: kick, snare, bass, and vocal. That's your center plane. Everything else shouldn't be in the center. Kick, snare, bass, and vocals. Those are the things that need to be in the center. Bass you can make stereo, but it definitely needs to be occupying the middle. So then it just comes down to these decisions that you have to make. Do you want the piano to be on the left or the right? Maybe the piano you can also make stereo and it sort of occupies a bit of the sides and less of the middle. But that synth line, is that left or right? That guitar, is that left or right? Everything occupies space, and kind of consequently everything takes away your attention. If you want everyone to focus on the vocal, that thing needs to be here. If you want people to focus on that guitar solo, that needs to be here. And then everything else kind of goes to the side. Things that are on your peripherals, you're going to be focusing on less than the thing that's here. So it's kind of thinking about that. It's like intersection, what needs to be front and center. And generally that's bass, kick, and snare, because that's holding the rhythm, and then vocals as well. So this is like the second step to your process, is you've got the volumes right, and now let's put things to the side. And like this is literally what I would do. As I said, those things are in the center: vocal, bass, kick, snare. And then, yeah, if there's like a guitar chord, I'd put that to the left, and maybe there's another guitar part, I'd put that to the right, balance it so that the volumes are kind of even matched on both sides. And then, if there's a synth part, maybe that's kind of over here. You can't see where my hand's going, but it's like over here or over here. You're just placing it around the field, and it gets kind of complicated when you think in 3D, because obviously you've got left and right, and then you've got up and down, and then when you get spatial effects, that's pulling it forward and backwards essentially. But just kind of simplifying it to like what's here, what's here, what's here, and then all of the volumes respectively, if that makes sense. So step 1, volumes. Step 2, pan them, place them, see how that feels. Hopefully it's feeling good now. It definitely should be. That vocal should be standing out in the way that you need, and hopefully the things on the left and the things on the right aren't kind of clashing with each other. The center's clean, the sides are clean. Looking good. The next step is compression. What is compression? Well, I mean, it's arguable whether you have compression or EQ. I think you could do either, like compression first or EQ first. Let's just do compression today. What is compression? The way that I think about compression is, if you've got an audio file, it's a threshold. If a sound goes above that threshold, it gets clamped down. The reason why we do this is, well, it's 2 reasons really. The first is we want to make the loud parts less loud. So when I suddenly talk really loudly, I want the compression to pull that down. Now, the second part of this is, because we've turned down the loud parts, it means now we can make up gain to make the quiet parts get louder. We're trying to basically just make this thing less like this and more like this. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to hear everything kind of in a equal sort of way. We don't want stuff to suddenly like punch out into your ears and kind of ruin your hearing. We want things to be consistent. So effectively, it's another tool of volume, because you're just trying to get the volume more consistent throughout the whole song. You want the loud parts to be tamed a bit, and you want the quiet parts to be pushed up a little bit. So we use it as that. You don't need to compress everything. You might only want to compress sounds that you really want to be present all the time, or if they're suddenly like getting really loud or really quiet. All of the little like bits and bobs on how to compress, like that's another video, but pretty much like the attack is how fast the compression kicks in, and the release is how fast it releases after like the main part hits. The threshold is the point in which it goes over that. That's when it clamps down. The ratio is for every dB over, how many dB does it pull it back? There's a few other settings, but like that's kind of the core of it. Use your ears. Like, does it sound good when you pull it back that fast and that hard? Maybe you want to ease it up. I can make a more like detailed video of how to compress, but I hope that's kind of helpful. The next step is EQ. EQ is just another volume game, because most things I guess in this are just volume relationships. EQ is just how loud are certain parts of the spectrum of sound, the frequency spectrum. It's kind of like in some ways like compression, because you might EQ down loud parts, as in like, when compression hits above the threshold, it pulls it down. So if there's a really loud part of a frequency, like a really sibilant S, which my voice has, and a lot of people's voices have, you might want to EQ that down, because you want less of that frequency. You might EQ up parts that are less loud, and particularly if you're thinking about a mix in general and you want like the overall mix to sound balanced, you might be making these decisions. Inside of a sound, you might just be boosting something that you like the sound of and reducing something that you don't like the sound of. It's not really more complicated than that. Like generally, it's just, do you like that frequency? Volume is like the global view. You like the bass, so you want more bass overall. You want more vocal, you want more backing vocal. EQ is going into that bass sound specifically and saying, I like what's happening in the low mids at 200 hertz or 500 hertz or whatever. I want more of that, and I don't want that sound at whatever other hertz. So it's kind of dialing in a little bit deeper. Now, as like a quick tip, use filters. Filters are like the best. So there's like phase problems with filters. Again, another story for another time. Sounds don't need to exist below 200 hertz on like a guitar maybe, or the bass doesn't need to go below 40. The vocal probably doesn't need to go below 100 or 200. I'm not telling you what to do, but more the idea is if there's sound happening down there and you're not filtering it, it's kind of happening there. Even if you can't hear it, it's still doing something. By cleaning that up, you get a little bit more room to wiggle, especially with that like low stuff. So just filter to where you need to, and don't leave it. Like it makes everything cleaner in my opinion. And same with the top end. Like you don't need 15k on a guitar. So it's just like using it to clean stuff up effectively. I feel like I'm rambling. So compression makes the volumes more even, and EQ, we're choosing what we want to hear inside of each sound, and potentially overall if we're doing mix level EQ moves. So now thinking about the steps, we get the volumes right, awesome. We get the panning right, awesome. Now we do the compression and we get like the vocal a little bit more even, because perhaps there were parts where you dipped and you want the chorus to be a bit more consistent, and maybe you now automate the volume up in the chorus for that vocal because it gets lost a little bit. Now when we're listening to the whole thing, think about the EQ. It's like, oh, I'm listening and I wish I could hear a little bit more of the bright end of my vocal. Or maybe like the bass has this ringing note that I don't want. Or the ride cymbal has like this honkiness in the middle at 700. And you just want to pull that out, Like now it's thinking about what particular frequencies inside this little picture do we now want to deal with. And finally, in this like kind of fundamental little rant that I'm doing whilst you're looking at me, I hope you're enjoying, is spatial effects. Now we've dealt with the 2D plane, which is up and down, left and right. Now we're thinking about forward and backwards. Effectively, when you put reverbs on things, you're pushing them further back. And like you can think about it like that. I don't tend to, but that is technically what's happening. I think the easiest way to think about it is just how present something is. If you put heaps of reverb on it, it kind of gets like more in the background. Only because like you can't hear all the transients as much. Transients just being the punch of sounds, like that kind of big hit that probably just ruins your ears. That's the transient. When you put reverb on it, you get you get that kind of tail, and the more reverb that you put on it, the more like you kind of lose the transient. It pushes it further back in the mix. And that's kind of like the way to think about it is, if you want something to be really upfront and in your face, don't put too many effects on it, or put like a longer pre-delay on it. Because if you think about, if I'm in a canyon with you and I shout and you're right in front of me, what you hear is me shouting, hey, and then you hear the reverb like, hey. If I'm a kilometer away and I shout, all you hear is the big hey that kind of is echoing off the canyon. So that's kind of like what it's doing. And that's how I think about it. It's just in that relationship, how close am I? How far away is the reverb? And also just like how big's the space? And then that kind of like makes your decisions for you. So last, put on the effects. See how that feels. Like, do you like the vocal being drenched in reverb? If it's a really long reverb, that implies it's in a big space, and how quickly that reverb hits in relation to the vocal determines how close the vocal is to you. If there's no reverb, I'm like right in your face. If there's a 20-second decay and also like a 0-second pre-delay, then like I'm not in your face at all, if that makes sense. And like realistically, you do all these things, like you should have a pretty good sounding song. You've got the volumes right, and at the end of the day, it's all choice. Like you choose how loud things are, and society might tell you that a loud vocal is good, but like you can do whatever you like. It's all about your ears, and I think the most important part is just like making sure that you're making decisions that you want to make. You're not just doing it for no apparent reason, and that's why I think the fundamentals are important. Make the right decision because you're actually making the decision, not just because you're on autopilot. Get the volume right, get the panning right, get the compression right, get the EQ right, get rid of the sounds that you don't like, and then spatially treat it, making sure that the things in the center are probably the most prominent, audible, and also probably not very like spatially affected in the sense that you don't want them far away. You want those here, and then the things on the sides, they can probably be more spatially like affected because you want those to feel more peripheral. You don't want those to be the things that you're like focused on. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. That's just how I think about it. This video has turned into a way longer rant than I was anticipating, but I hope you found this helpful. I know there was like nothing on the screen except for my face, but yeah, that's my thoughts on the fundamentals. If you found this helpful, hit like, hit subscribe. I apologize there wasn't more like eye candy. This has been like a stoic challenge for you to sit and like just ponder my words. Yeah, look, I think about this a lot, and yeah, I hope this is helpful. I hope this helps your mixing, because when I started thinking like this, I think it helped my mixing a lot. So yeah. Hit like, hit subscribe, comment something nice. Catch you next video. Goodbye.